Welcome everybody, and thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us for this live event. My name is Mark Hudson, CEO of Squirrel365, and today I'm joined by my colleague, Donald McCormick, our Chief Strategy Officer, and Dr. William Strauss, President and Founder of Future Metrics. Now, we're recording this live event and it will be available to you all later today. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end, and any questions you may have for Bill. So I encourage you to use the Q&A and chat panels during the session for any questions you may have, and I'll collate them from there. And as I've mentioned, in fact, why not use the chat session now to say hi and let us know where you are in the world, what you're watching from. Okay, let's get started. Along with the advancements in more sustainable energy production, technology has an important part to play in the education of large corporations and governments on how the changes they can have make a positive impact on climate change and reduce global warming. One such example is Future Metrics, who use interactive calculators designed using Squirrel365 to show their customers how moving to more sustainable energy production moves them and the rest of the world towards negative CO2 emissions. The Squirrel team are delighted that Future Metrics are using calculators in this way to educate people all around the world on how they can take the steps to be a more sustainable, cleaner and brighter future for us all. And we wanted to share that with you all today. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. William Strauss, President and Founder of Future Metrics. Bill is globally recognized as a leading expert in the wood pellet sector. He continues to be a thought leader in the sector and has published numerous papers on a variety of subjects relevant to the wood pellet sector. Named one of the most influential leaders in the biomass sector in 2016 and 2017 by Argus Media, and recipient of the 2012 International Excellence in Bioenergy Award. And just this week, he picked up his latest award at the Infosol IBIS 2021 conference for his biomass energy carbon capture and storage dashboards, or BECS for us mere mortals, which I believe he will be demonstrating today. Bill, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. And good day to everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Thanks for attending. And what I'm going to do here in the next 30 plus minutes is discuss first sort of the foundation for what these dashboards are built around. That is, describe the sector in which Future Metrics operates. And then we'll take a look as we work our way through that presentation, a few of the dashboards that we've created using Squirrel365. Just to let everybody know, we were once an Excelsius user for our dashboards years ago. And as some of you know, Excelsius phased out with the partially because of the end of life for Flash. And we're quite pleased at this alternative. In fact, I would say it's quite a bit better than the old dashboard building software. So we're thrilled with the Squirrel guys, the development team, for the work they're doing and have done. It's a fabulous product. And in fact, we have 11 calculators on our website now, all using Squirrel365. We're going to look at a couple of those today, but they're all free to use on the Future Metrics website. So browse your way to the website and have fun with it. Just a couple slides to let you know who we are. We are one of the leading consultancies, in fact, maybe the leading consultancy in the wood pellet sector. Now, that's a pretty niche little space. Many of you probably don't even know what that is. Some of you do. And I'll describe in just a minute what that space is and what we do. And of course, the usual graphics of some of our clients in recent years. And for those of you that know the industry, some of those names, quite a few of those names are very important in this industry. And just the last slide on Future Metrics, our core team. And just to point out at the bottom of that slide, the sort of our tagline, which is mitigating climate change is the foundation of our mission. We're very committed to that. We're quite passionate about that. And it sort of forms our work, the strategy for our work. Okay, so let's get down to describing what we do. Well, we actually we work with companies that replace coal in power plants. So we take we work with companies that take existing power stations, utility scale, that produce hundreds and hundreds of megawatts of electricity from carbon dioxide emitting coal, And we worked to change the fuel supply for that power station so that it's carbon neutral. And I'll explain that in just a moment, and what the product actually is. But first, the foundation for this whole industry, it's all about climate change and the need to mitigate CO2 emissions. And a few charts to illustrate just how serious this is. This is the Climate Risk Index published by a group of actuaries. And actuaries, as some of you know, are the people that price and estimate risk for insurance companies and other entities. And those folks that make a livelihood from measuring risk are sounding the alarm. And what this means is the cost of doing business is going up. It's getting more and more expensive just to insure yourself against unknown risky events. And that is going to motivate change for sure. Also, to put it in perspective, this is a sort of a little simulation of the fossil fuel age. Along the bottom axis is years from 1650 to 2800. And we're kind of in that middle of that peak around the year 2000 or so. Of course, we don't know when that peak will slope down to back to the baseline. In this particular simulation, it's somewhere around 2150. Could be sooner, could be later. But the point is, over a period of about 250 years, all of the carbon sequestered over millions of years is being released. There's got to be a consequence. And this is one of the consequences. Atmospheric CO2 concentrations have hit record highs. That seems like it should be pretty obvious since we're emitting a lot of carbon that was geologically sequestered. And the byproducts of this are many things. The world is heating up. The atmospheres and oceans are heating up at record speed. And so there will be changes to the climate. And that's what we're all about. We want to make sure or try to mitigate this problem before the catastrophe hits at a global level. So what are these wood pellets? Well, they're highly densified little nuggets of fuel, solid fuel that replace coal. Actually, there's another market for wood pellets for heating. It's slightly different, but similar. But the use of wood pellets in power generation is its own sector, more or less. And it's a pathway to negative carbon emissions. And this tells you in a few words why. Essentially, if you look at the second to the bottom paragraph, if the harvest rate is less than or equal to the annual growth rate, then the forest isn't shrinking. And we're not talking about old growth forests. We're not talking about protected forests. We're talking about tree farms, essentially. These are large areas of forest that are managed to provide inputs for the forest products industry. That is stuff that you make lumber out of, stuff you make pulp and paper out of, panel boards, and other stuff, including wood pellets. And as long as you're not taking away the trees faster than they're growing, then the forest isn't shrinking, which means the stock of carbon held in that forest is constant or growing. And in fact, every molecule of CO2 emitted from combustion is absorbed by the new growth more or less contemporaneously. If you think of a large landscape of forest, some of the trees in that forest are old, some are middle-aged, some are young, and they're in all stages of growth. And only the mature trees in this tree farm are harvested. Meanwhile, most of the other trees are still growing. And if it's a 40-year growth cycle, that means, 1 in 40 plots is harvested every year. The rest are still growing. So it's a dynamic system that's continuously absorbing CO2, even as it's being emitted. Just to put a little more perspective on this niche industry that we're talking about, the current, in 2020, about a little over 20 million tons of this upgraded, densified solid fuel made from the byproducts of the forest products industry were traded around the world. 20 million metric tons. We forecast that it's going to be close to 45 million tons by 2027, or more than double. And the US happens to be the largest exporter of this stuff in the world. You can see other countries. Vietnam is a big exporter, Canada, the Baltic states, that would be Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, Southeast Asia, other than Vietnam, and of course, the former states of the Soviet Union are also major exporters. And if this, by the way, this Sankey chart or map is from our website as well. It's another free product that we offer. So if you browse to the Future Metrics website, you can play with it as you wish. But essentially, you can select any country in the world and see where their pellets go, or any country in the world and see where their pellets come from. The U.S. exports in 2020 are shown there. The major buyer or importer from the U.S. is the U.K. In fact, the next Sankey chart shows you where the UK pellets come from. And of course, the majority do come from the United States, but the second largest supplier is Canada, and then on down, including some of the Baltic states. The UK is the largest importer in the world, and that's due to two major power stations in England that have converted from coal to pellets. One of those stations is the Drax Power Station in Selby. 4 650 megawatt units at that plant are running on 100% wood pellets instead of 100% coal. It's the largest decarbonization project, I think, in the world. And it's also supplying about 8 or 9% of England's electricity from renewable fuel. And the size of the market right now is about one Panamax sized vessel. That's 65,000 metric tons every day. This particular photograph happens to be in Vancouver, British Columbia, and that vessel is being loaded with wood pellets. You can see one of the holds are open. It's dry bulk carriers, and it's on its way probably to the UK to supply the Drax power station. And so that brings us to our first dashboard. And let me actually bring the live version up. And I'll do that right now. And by the way, that's our website. If I scroll down, you don't have to go too far past some white papers to find all the interactive dashboards. Just click on any one and you're there. So this is the one that you saw in the PowerPoint a moment ago. And by the way, this is our first Squirrel dashboard, and the Squirrel team was very helpful in designing this dashboard. We've done all the rest in-house since then, but this was our first one when we were sort of wondering what to do after Excelsius. And so thanks to their great designers for helping us put this together. This particular dashboard shows you what the CO2 savings are if you import pellets from someplace else. So the little waterfall chart up here shows you the total CO2 footprint, which is a combination of everything along the supply chain where fossil fuels are used. So when you're making the pellets, you have to use electricity. And some of that electricity may be generated from fossil fuels. When you're moving the feedstock for that pellet plant from the forest or from the sawmills, there's fossil fuel used, and also in terms of shipping. And so you can change any of these. And so if the shipping distance becomes smaller, the CO2 footprint becomes smaller. And up in the upper left corner, you can see the reduction in carbon dioxide emissions for a power station that switches from coal to pellets after the carbon footprint that's accumulated in the supply chain. So under the assumptions currently in this dashboard, it's about 83% less carbon intensive than coal. And the shorter the shipping distance, the better that gets. Ship size matters. So if you go to a Panamax, which is the big vessel we saw a minute ago down here, you can see that you're now 88% lower. If you go back to Handymax, you're 85% lower than coal. And so you can change any of these set points, including the electricity fuel mix through these spinner controls, and also power station parameters, how efficient is the power station, and what's the energy content of the wood pellets. It's a great piece of work for calculating what the benefits are. Okay, let me go back to the PowerPoint now and head to the next slide. This one, I just threw this in because it's kind of something that we focus a lot of this of our work on educating policymakers, actually educating utility operators as well in the United States, but educating policymakers. And one of the things, as many of you know, that really excite policymakers is job creation. And so we like to show what the job creation is if you switch from coal to pellets, or you make power from other sources. So let's say you're making 550 megawatts of power. That's a typical power station, maybe a little smaller for some. And you're using 100% pellet fuel. The station would consume a little over 2 million tons a year of pellets. We'll see how that works. But the job creation piece is quite interesting because the supply chain or the labor requirements for producing and supplying pellet fuel is actually higher than coal. So we go from about 2,300 jobs to about 3,300 jobs for fuel supply for a 550 megawatt power station if we switch. If it's that same amount of power is produced with natural gas, it's not even 300 jobs. And of course, it's obvious, but sometimes people forget that there are no fuel supply jobs with wind and solar. Absolutely none. The only jobs in wind and solar are maintenance of the operations, which of course you also need for power stations as well. So this is only the fuel supply chain. And of course, we have big fat zeros for wind and solar. All right, let's go to the next dashboard, which is what does it cost to do this? Well, let me bring that dashboard up. I'll put it on the screen here for you. So what this dashboard is showing is a bunch of inputs that yield the levelized cost of electricity. If you look down here in the bottom right corner, you can see the LCOE, as it's often called. And in fact, we have it in dollars, but you can also show it in yen or euros. So if you switch to euros here, you can see the difference in euros. And we have the exchange rate here. I should have looked at what today's exchange rate is, but this is the default in the dashboard. So the total cost of generation, and this is, by the way, 100% pellets. So this slider, you can go all the way from zero coal to 100% pellets. 100% coal and zero pellets to 100% pellets and zero coal. And let's make this power plant about the size of the one I was just talking about, which is 550 megawatts. So I'm running that slider in the upper left corner to 550. And we can see that pellet demand is about 2.1 million tons, 2.2. If we went all the way down to zero, it's about 1.7 million tons of coal. So it's pretty clear that it takes more pellets, more tons of pellets, to get the same amount of power out of that station as it does coal. And that is where some of the modification is required in a new conversion. So we have here in the center, is this a conversion of an existing PC? And PC stands for pulverized coal. It's in the title up here. Pulverized coal plants operate, that's the majority of utility power stations that use coal as fuel. They actually pulverize the coal to dust, blow it up through pipes and into burners. It almost burns like a liquid fuel. And exactly the same thing happens with the wood pellets. They're pulverized to dust, blown through the same pipes to the same burners. So you can see that the modifications are actually quite modest to make this change. And you could put some inputs. So the cost per kilowatt for the conversion, the fixed O&M, variable costs, et cetera, you can change these. And of course, if you change these, it also changes the LCOE values, et cetera. Of course, nothing changes because we're all coal. Let me go back to 100% pellets because it doesn't matter if you're not doing it. So now we actually use these modest changes in some of the other inputs. But what's interesting here is this shows you, assuming no subsidies, the carbon tax has to be higher because right now we have a carbon tax slider here set to 0. But let's slide this over. And what this shows you is the avoided carbon tax based on their CO2 emissions. And this table actually shows you the relationship here. So if we get this over to a certain point, you'll see here that the text turns from red to green as the carbon tax becomes high enough now to justify pellet fuel over coal. And that happens when the carbon tax results in a cost of emissions that's higher than the increase in the cost of generation of pellets versus 100% coal. In this case, it's a $56 per megawatt hour increase if you're 100% pellets, using all these assumptions on cost, so delivered price, which can be changed. By the way, obviously, if you lower the delivered cost, the incremental cost of generation also goes down. And you can change the price of coal and everything else, and even the energy content of both. Some coal stations use higher energy content fuels, and some use lower. It doesn't matter what you set the coal at right now because it's 100% pellets. So it depends on your assumptions. But what this does provide for a policymaker is guidance on what the minimum carbon tax is needed to make this policy, or at least make the power stations have an incentive to follow this policy. So that's dashboard, second dashboard I wanted to illustrate. Let me go back to the PowerPoint slide quickly. And just to give you an idea, noticed in a minute ago, I had the carbon tax at about $56, I think it was, per metric ton. Current carbon pricing in the European Union, and this is the European Union trading system, emissions trading system, or ETS, is over $60 a ton. And this is all in metric tons. And that's somewhere just over 50 euros per metric ton under the exchange rate, which is actually today's exchange rate. This chart was just updated before the presentation. So the cost of carbon is actually high enough in the EU right now to motivate change without other subsidies, which is pretty remarkable. So we're seeing some real interest or increased interest from the coal generating sector in this strategy as an alternative. So we were talking about carbon negative or carbon neutral. I'm going to wrap up over in the next 10 minutes or so and leave some time for Q&A by showing another dashboard. And this one is the one that just recently won the wonderful award that we've got from Infosol. The award was called Limitless Business Intelligence 2021, and it was quite an honor for us to receive that. So we're going to show this dashboard now, and it's an important story because in the previous story, I said you're reducing carbon emissions. Let's say you're shipping it across the Atlantic to England by about 85% versus coal. Well, you can actually go carbon negative. That is, you can subtract carbon from the atmosphere, not just be neutral, but negative. And that's where this dashboard is so important. So let me bring that one up. There we go. And let me tell you the story that this tells. So this actually tells a sort of start to finish story. In the upper left corner, that green circle represents the size of the working forest. That's not a national park or a forest that's protected or old growth or anything. This is a forest that's been traditionally used to supply trees for the lumber industry, the pulp and paper industry, for decades. In fact, in some places for more than a century, these forests have been managed. And everybody goes, well, some people go, some opponents to this industry say, well, you're just going to cut all the trees down and that's going to be it. You're going to rape the forest. Well, when people build sawmills, pulp mills, and pellet mills, they spend a lot of money. A large industrial wood pellet factory in the US is $150 million or more to build. And if you build something with that kind of investment, you kind of want it to run for a long, long time. Same with sawmills and pulp mills. You can't just move them to a new spot when you run out of trees. So you size these plants to have an input every day of feedstock that is sustainable from a business point of view, not even thinking environmental. That is, they have to have wood coming across their scale every day, essentially forever. That's how the business models are built. So there is a relationship between the productivity of the working forests and the size of the mills that can depend on those working forests. And this dashboard gives you insight into what that is. So let's say this working forest is 3,000 hectares. And we do most everything in metric because most of the world is metric. So for those of you from the States, you can flip over to Imperial here. It shows you what the area is in square miles and in what the radius of the circle. If we go back to metric, it's in square kilometers. And by the way, notice how easy it is to go from square kilometers to hectares. Not so easy to go from square miles to acres. Anyway, this shows you that a circle with about a 19-mile radius would produce enough wood. And if you go all the way to the bottom of this first column, for over 500,000 tons a year of wood pellet production. And that's a fairly typical size for a wood pellet factory in the Southeast United States and in some other jurisdictions as well. But let's see, how do we get from here to there? Well, we work our way down. And first of all, we have the average growth rate. And by the way, if I change the size of the working forest, you can see the circle increases and decreases in radius slightly. And there's some other action going on around the spreadsheet as well, or the dashboard as well. And I will talk about that in just a second. But let's work our way down through this first column. The average growth rate is 10 green tons per hectare per year. Well, where does that come from? If we click on this little question mark, we can see a chart showing you the relationship between growth rates and sort of like your latitude. The farther north you are, the slower the growth rate. I mean, that sort of makes sense. If you're in the tropics or the subtropics, trees grow quite quickly. And if you're in Scandinavia or northern Canada, well, actually, at some point, trees stop growing altogether as you hit tundra, but they go slower and slower. So this gives you a relationship between growth rate in tons per hectare per year and years to reach harvest maturity. So if you're in the northern climates, your tree farm crop takes about 80 years to grow. You have to be a very patient farmer. And a lot of this is either government-owned land or family-owned land. So the patience is built in. But if you're down in the tropics, it grows a lot faster. The warmer the climate, the faster the growth rate. And we said about 10 tons per hectare per year. That's something like you might see in the US Southeast. And so this is enough to grow 3 million green tons of new growth every year. What percent is left on the forest floor when they go into harvest this crop? We're going to say 5%, but you can change that. The annual harvest of the mature stand after you leave it behind, and then some percent goes to building materials or furniture. That would be lumber or furniture manufacturing or other products that go into buildings. And 20% of that becomes paper, goes to a pulp and paper mill, and that leaves 45%. That leaves a residual of 40% right here for the pellet manufacturing person. And that's a little over 1.1 million tons available for production. And you can change any of these assumptions and this residual will change. So if we take less to the building materials, more is left over. And by the way, some of the stuff that goes to sawmills, in fact, in most locations where there's pellet production, all of the byproducts of sawmilling make their way to pellet plants. That is the sawdust, the chips, etc. I mean, it's pretty obvious if you have a round log and you're turning it into square boards, there's going to be some waste. And it used to be called waste. Now it's actually a byproduct, and it's frequently makes its way to pellet mills. So pellet mills are taking some of the byproducts, which actually in some locations, in many locations, used to just be burned in the open air back in the old days. That's not allowed anymore. Okay, so these pellets, let's go to the center column, make their way to a power plant, and that power plant makes power and CO2. If we go down, we see what the energy content of these pellets are. And we're assuming 17.6 gigajoules per metric ton, which is about 4.9 megawatt hours per metric ton. We have a power plant efficiency assumption, which we can change, increase or decrease. And that gives you how many megawatt hours per year you're producing. If we take the average annual consumption per household in megawatt hours, and by the way, this question mark is a hyperlink that opens up a web page that is by the US government, I think by the EPA, if I remember correctly, or maybe the Energy Information Administration, that actually gives you the data and statistics behind average annual consumption per household, but you can change that as well. At any rate, this 600,000 tons that we're making from the 3 million green tons of growth, some of which makes its way to a pellet mill, ends up making enough green, low carbon or carbon neutral, actually in combustion, electricity for about 118,000 homes. And you'll see this little image here. Each image represents about 10,000, well, does represent 10,000 homes. And if we go up in the upper left and reduce the size of the forest, you can see the graphic actually changing. So you get a really nice graphic. So if we have a really small working forest, all the way over to the left of the slider, we're only making 120,000 tons of wood pellets, but it's still enough for almost 24,000 homes. And if we go larger and larger, you can see that that changes as well. There's another graphic changing in the bottom right. I'll get to that in a second. So we have CO2 emissions as a byproduct of this power generation. That's anytime you burn something that has carbon in it, which wood does, you're going to make carbon dioxide. Atoms per unit of bone dry wood, that's just bone dry means zero moisture content. Most wood has some moisture content. It's a way of apples to apples comparisons when you're talking about wood. We're going to say 50%. That changes depending on the hardwood and softwood. You can change that. So the tons of carbon sequestered in the pellet fuel, about 276. And if you hover over this little question mark, this is a hotspot control in Squirrel. You can see that 1 ton of carbon atoms produces 3.67 tons of CO2. So depending on the carbon concentration, whether it's wood, coal, or whatever, you can calculate how much CO2 is produced. And we've calculated that. So we're making about 1 million tons of carbon dioxide from this power plant. Now, do we have bioenergy carbon capture storage? That's what BECCS stands for. Let's just say no. And you can see that instead of going into the BECCS box, we now take the carbon dioxide, we run it back into the forest. In other words, as I said earlier in this presentation, the forest is sequestering the stuff about as fast as it's faster than it's being released. So we have a circle here, a cycle that yields carbon neutral. But if we throw in biomass energy carbon capture and storage, we permanently remove that 1 million tons. And this is actually, there's a huge project, there's several huge projects around the world on this. This is being done and working towards the next big phase in our fight against climate change. The best you can do with fossil fuels, so suppose they put CCS on the back of a coal station and it's 100% efficient, that's zero, that's carbon neutral. But you can't do carbon negative. The only way you do carbon negative is by having the trees absorb the carbon, of course, under sustainability conditions, so that you're not depleting the carbon stock in the forest landscape, and then taking that to a converted power station, making power, and then instead of putting the CO2 back in the atmosphere, that would be carbon neutral, you're actually sending it into the earth and putting it away forever. And in fact, in the UK, the big project that's underway there looks to pump it into the North Sea, under the North Sea, not into the North Sea, at the old formations that yielded so much natural gas over many decades. It's kind of poetic to put it right back where it came from. And finally, and then I'll be done with this presentation, if we say 4.2 tons of CO2 emitted per car per year, this is always the favorite graphic, our favorite metric actually for sort of measuring what the impacts of CO2 benefits are. This particular project, and let's go back up to about 300,000 hectares like we started, that's close enough, is the equivalent of taking 265,000 cars permanently off the road. I mean, that's a pretty significant number. And by the way, that graphic also changes as we increase or decrease the size of our working forest, so you get all that. And the very last thing is we actually threw in a summary window here. And so this summary window captures the data from throughout this dashboard and puts it into a final summary. So wherever you land when you're playing with your assumptions, you can always click this open. By the way, there's a couple, you can hover over some of these question marks and answer questions in case they pop up, but it just gives you the summary of what we just talked about. All right, so I'm going to take that off the screen. And I have a final slide that I just like to pop up because it's so nice to look at. And that is me actually surveying the sustainability of the trees in British Columbia. I had to go skiing to do that. So that's it. I'm all done. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Bill. That was excellent. Is that Whistler, or is that somewhere else in?
Yeah, no, it's up near Blue River, British Columbia. That's actually helicopter skiing.
Oh, fantastic. Wonderful stuff. That was excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Donald McCormick, our Chief Strategy Officer, who I know has got a number of questions for you himself, but also we've had some fantastic questions come in from the really engaged audience today. So Donald, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Mark, and thanks, Bill. It's great. It's really fascinating. Although I have to say, you're a great customer, but if you keep sending us pictures of skiing, and particularly pictures of you skiing on the way to work, which you have the habit of doing, I'm not sure we can keep you as a customer for much longer because that's intolerable. Anyway, there are two, because this is obviously, Bill's been presenting all his work through our calculators, through his Squirrel calculators. There are two different sets of questions. One is about the wood pellets and carbon emissions, and there's a lot of questions on here that I'm not sure I'll be able to do justice to, but I will try. I'm not sure I understand them enough, but I'll try and get them across. And there's also people asking about the software itself and the calculators you've got, because the interesting thing about the calculators obviously is most of the questions are saying, hey, when you change that on the calculator, this happened, and is that really true? And it's really engaging people like that. So what I'll do is I'll ask you a couple of questions about the software very quickly to start with, but then leave most of the time to talk about the meat of the carbon reduction stuff, which I think a lot of people are keen to dig into. So a couple of questions on the software. Obviously, the way Squirrel works is you drive all of these calculators from Excel spreadsheets. Now, you could just leave them as Excel and let people have Excel and type in numbers. What do you find is the most compelling reason to take that extra step of packaging up as these sort of interactive dashboards rather than just giving people access to the native Excel documents?
A great question, Donald. Well, first of all, some of the underlying calculations in some of these spreadsheets is a bit proprietary, or not so proprietary, but in the sense that we spend a lot of time developing the models, and we don't like to share our models. So actually sharing a spreadsheet, even though you lock it up and you hide stuff, there's always ways to get around that. So we prefer not to sort of show what's going on under the hood in some of these calculations, because we spend a lot of time sort of gathering the data, doing the modeling, and verifying the information. But really, that's just a small reason. The real reason is it's engaging. The graphics, the fact that when you change one thing, you can actually watch in real time the impacts on whatever it is, whatever system you're trying to model. All that is super engaging. You can quickly change scenarios. You can watch what happens if we take this away or we add this. And it makes it really easy for somebody at the other end to sort of absorb, experiment with, and internalize the type of information we're trying to transmit. When you're looking at a screen full of cells in an Excel spreadsheet, it's just not the same.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. And then the second and final question on the software is, so obviously you put a lot of effort into these models. It's part of the core of your business. Once you've got a model like that, typically, how long does it take for you to go from that to the sort of the first cut of the Squirrel presentation of it, so you can start to show it to people?
Oh, it's pretty quickly sometimes. The Excel model behind the Bex spreadsheet that's on the screen now, I don't recall how long it took us to sort of put all that together, but it wasn't long because we had a lot of the components already known. But once the spreadsheet was finished, I would say 3 or 4 days of work, and not even 8 hours each day. Essentially, in the first day or two, you kind of get all the components on the screen, you organize it, you take a look at this, and then another day or two to kind of make it look good and attractive and enticing, and then some debugging, clicking on things and figuring out, oops, I forgot to connect this, or this cell isn't quite right, or whatever. So it's very, very fast. I mean, this is no code stuff. We don't know how to code at FutureMetrics. We just use the product, and it's quite easy to use. You just drop the components in place, link them up with a spreadsheet, and you're good to go.
Great. Sounds good. So anyone, I'll pause on the software stuff there. Anyone's interested in Squirrel and how it works, lots of stuff on our website. Reach out to Mark or myself, and we can happy to take you through the process and that easy process that Bill was talking about. But let's get on to some of the questions about the sort of the carbon capture, the carbon emissions question. So a question from James is very long, but I think it's summed up at the end by this issue, and actually when you were presenting at IBIS this week, Bill, I heard this question as well. It's saying Drax can't guarantee that its CO2 emissions will be sequestered by the wood farms from which the pellets come.
I read that question. Yeah.
Is that an issue? Or what? Yeah.
Yeah, no, James raises a really important point, and that is that sustainability is the basis, foundation, core, and license to operate actually for this industry. So without that, the industry doesn't make sense. And obviously the CO2 story falls apart if in fact the forest is not absorbing equal to or faster than what's being emitted. But the industrial wood pellet sector, and when I say industrial, that's pellets used to replace coal, because say the power station, the Drax station, depends on government subsidy, the government doesn't just take their word for it that they're reducing carbon emissions. They have to prove it. So there's an entire and very rigorous independent third-party auditing system in place to assure that the source of the feedstocks that make these wood pellets, and by the way, the pellets are just a small piece of a harvest, right? A lot of it goes to lumber and paper. Then that has to be certified independently. If it's not, then Drax doesn't get credit from the government or the subsidy from the government, and then they can't afford, the whole thing falls apart for them. Their business model becomes degraded. So, and that's true in other countries, not just the UK. The major certifying agencies, FSB, Forest Stewardship, FSC, sorry, Forest Stewardship Council, SFI, Sustainable Forestry Initiative, and SBP, Sustainable Biomass Partnership. Those are three of the big third-party auditing firms that assure that the forests are growing as fast or faster than they're being taken away.
Okay, cool. And then there's another interesting one which I hadn't thought of, which Richard brings up here, which he's talking as more and more lumber mills and pulp and paper mills are using the waste from their forest wood to generate their own electricity. Will that hamper the supply of pellets to the power station industry?
If in fact, pulp and paper mills, a lot of paper mills already do that. They use low-grade material. Pellet mills and pulp mills can't live in the same wood basket. And wood basket is a term used in the industry to kind of represent that green circle that's in the dashboard. So what's your draw area? And if that overlaps with a competing buyer, that's not necessarily good for your business. And if that competing buyer, if you're a pellet maker and that competing buyer is a pulp mill, it's definitely not good for your business, because pulp mills buy the same types of chips and byproducts that and produce those byproducts as well, in some cases, as pellet mills. And pulp mills can afford to pay a higher price for their materials, given the price of pulp and paper. Yeah, it's a good point. I suppose, actually, it's just the opposite right now, by the way. Sawmills are running so hard because of the housing starts and the recent sort of boom in housing, and how long that's going to last, we don't know. But sawmills are running at 100%, which means there's more sawmill residuals now than there have been. In fact, there's a glut. The sawmills can't, even the sawmills around where I live in Maine, cannot use all the byproducts they produce. They use a little bit for electricity and heat, but they have way more than they need to supply the heat and power they need for the sawmill. So they sell their byproducts to pellet mills. And right now, there's actually even more byproducts. So there's a glut. So some of the regional pellet mills are actually seeing a reduction in their feedstock costs. And by the way, when I'm talking about residuals from sawmills, there are also residuals from the forest harvest. There is the small diameter tops and limbs unsuitable for lumber and often pulp and paper. And then for lumber, there's these trees that are rotten in the middle or crooked that can't be taken to a sawmill because they just don't make boards. And those will go to a pulp mill or a pellet mill. Pulp mills and pellet mills take similar feedstocks. Pulp mills have been making paper. And by the way, pulp chip demand is many times larger than pellet chip demand. And pulp mills have been doing this for decades, in fact, centuries. And you don't see massive environmental objection to the folks making the packaging and tissue and paper that they use, which always mystifies me because it's the same feedstock.
Yes. Okay. And so we're up at we were scheduled to finish at quarter to, and we're just past there. But there's one other, which may be a quick question from Rick, which is the conversion rate of green wood to pellets controllable?
It's the conversion rate. Almost 100% depends on the moisture content of the wood, and that's when it's harvested. That's not controllable. It's whatever the tree is, and a typical tree is about 50% water. So the conversion rate depends on the moisture content. If we go back to, let me go back to that slide. I think I had that slide. Oh, I don't think I have it on the slide here, do I? Yeah, no, we have another dashboard, which I don't have up, which shows you how much wood you need to actually produce actually, I'll bring it up right now if you just take a second.
Sure.
There we go. This dashboard is also free, and it shows you how much wood is needed. You can see if you look at the moisture content slider here, it's at 50%. The drier the wood, the less raw material it needs. So in this case, you need 241,000 tons of feedstock. And if it's much wetter, you need 400,000 tons of feedstock. So it depends on the moisture content totally. That's the key. Hardwood and softwood, there's not much difference in conversion from green wood to pellets. A little bit, but it's pretty minor.
Okay, great. Well, as I say, we've run out of our allotted time, so it just leaves me to say thank you so much, Bill, for doing the presentation. I think the dashboards are great, but I'm a little biased in that, but fascinating as well, both in terms of your presentation and some of the questions coming in. It's obviously something that will be debated for some time to come. But thank you.
Just quickly,
yeah?
If anybody has any questions we didn't get to, just send an email. It's williamstrauss@futuremetrics.com. Be happy to answer them offline.
What we'll do then, Bill, is we'll take the questions and package them up. We can get a download of them and send them on to you and let you know who asked what, and you can maybe follow up with people. That would be great, because because I certainly feel that there's a thirst to know and a thirst to ask questions. So we'll do that. So anyway, thank you so much for being on, and thank you from Mark and I to everyone who has attended today. This session has been recorded, and we will send out the recording to everyone who registered, and obviously including everyone who is here today. And feel free to share that recording with anyone else that you want to do. And other than that, thank you, Bill, and thank you everybody for attending. And good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are.
Okay.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good night.